They looked at her hoodie and saw a trespasser. They looked at her skin and saw a target. But what the captain, the flight crew, and the arrogant couple in seat 1B didn't realize was that the quiet girl they were dragging down the aisle didn't just pay for her ticket. She owned the lease on the very plane they were sitting in. You are about to hear the most satisfying story of instant karma in aviation history. This isn't just about a seat dispute. This is what happens when Diamond Medallion status goes to war with the Federal Aviation Administration. Buckle up. The FAA is already on the tarmac, and nobody is going to believe who gets arrested first. The humidity in Miami was stifling, even inside the air-conditioned jet bridge of Aero Atlantic Flight 492, bound for London Heathrow. It was the kind of sticky heat that made patience thin and tempers short. Sienna Vance adjusted the strap of her battered canvas messenger bag. It was an old thing, frayed at the edges, a stark contrast to the gleaming Rimowa aluminum carry-ons rolling around her. She wore oversized noise-cancelling headphones around her neck, a charcoal grey hoodie that had seen better days, and leggings. To the untrained eye, she looked like a college student flying standby on a buddy pass. To the trained eye, specifically, an eye that read the Financial Times or followed the erratic fluctuations of aerospace tech stocks, she was the founder of Vance Propulsion Systems, a company that had recently secured a generic but massive contract with the Department of Defense. But on Flight 492, there were no trained eyes, just tired, wealthy ones. Sienna stepped onto the plane, flashed her digital boarding pass to the flight attendant at the door, a woman named Janice, whose name tag rested crookedly on her blouse, and turned left toward the first-class cabin. "Miss?" Janice's voice was sharp, a reflex. "Economy is to the right. Row 40 is—" Sienna didn't stop walking. She held up her phone screen without turning around. It displayed a bold QR code and the designation, 1A. Janice blinked, her mouth slightly open. She checked her manifest, frowning as if the paper itself had lied to her. But Sienna was already settling into seat 1A, the prime window seat on the Boeing 777 300ER. She dropped her canvas bag into the overhead bin, pushing aside a pristine Louis Vuitton duffel just an inch to make room. That was the first sin. The second sin was existing in that seat when Carter and Priscilla Sterling boarded. Carter Sterling was a man who wore his net worth like a suit of armor. He was in his 60s, red-faced, clad in a navy blazer with gold buttons that looked tailored to intimidate. His wife, Priscilla, was a vision of beige cashmere and tightly pulled facelifts. They were the kind of couple who didn't just visit places, they inspected them. They stopped at row 1. Carter looked at his boarding pass, then at seat 1A, then at Sienna. Sienna had her eyes closed, listening to an audiobook on orbital mechanics. She felt the shadow before she heard the voice. "Excuse me," Carter said. It wasn't a question. It was a command disguised as politeness. Sienna slid one ear cup off. "Yes." "You're in my seat," Carter stated, gesturing with a manicured hand. "I'm in 1A. My wife is in 1B. We always sit together, and I always take the window." Sienna glanced at his hand. He wasn't holding a boarding pass for 1A. He was holding one for 1C, aisle. "Actually," Sienna said, her voice calm, possessing that specific rasp of someone who had spent the last 48 hours in a clean room negotiation, "your pass says 1C. I booked 1A. I prefer the window for sleeping." She slid the headphone back on. The silence that followed was louder than the jet engines spooling up outside. Carter Sterling turned a shade of crimson that usually preceded a call to a lawyer. "Young lady," Priscilla chimed in, her voice shrill. "My husband has been a Diamond Elite member with Aero Atlantic for 20 years. We do not sit apart, and we certainly do not sit across the aisle from—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking over Sienna's hoodie, her sneakers, her complexion. Students. Sienna sighed, removing the headphones again. She turned fully towards them. I'm not a student. I'm a paying passenger, and I'm tired. Please take your assigned seat, sir. The flight is full. I don't think you understand, Carter snarled, leaning in, invading her personal space. I don't know how you got upgraded, affirmative action points, or an employee sweepstakes, but this is a business-class environment. We have work to do. I need that window for privacy. Now move. Sienna looked him dead in the eye. No. It was a small word, but it hit the cabin like a gunshot. Other passengers in first class, men in suits, women in pearls, stopped rustling their newspapers. They looked up, but they didn't look at Carter's rudeness with disgust. They looked at Sienna's defiance with suspicion. Carter stood up straight, adjusting his blazer. Janice! He bellowed. Janice, the flight attendant from the door, came rushing over. Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling? There is, Carter said, pointing a shaking finger at Sienna. This person is refusing to accommodate a Diamond member, and honestly, I suspect she's in the wrong seat entirely. Check her ticket again. I think she's poaching. Janice turned to Sienna. Her face hardened. The customer service mask slipped, revealing the exhausted, biased prejudice underneath. Ma'am, Janice said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all warmth. I need to see your boarding pass. Again. Sienna didn't flinch. She unlocked her phone and held it up. The screen clearly showed Sienna Vance. Seat 1A, first class. Janice stared at it. She tapped the screen, perhaps hoping it was a screenshot or a fake app. It refreshed. It was real. It says 1A, Janice admitted, but she didn't move away. She looked at Carter, who was fuming, and then back at Sienna. The dynamic in the cabin was shifting. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about hierarchy. Carter Sterling was a known quantity, a frequent flyer, a heavy spender, a man who probably bought the crew chocolates at Christmas to mask his arrogance. Sienna was a ghost, a nobody in a hoodie. Mr. Sterling requires the window seat, Janice said, improvising a policy that didn't exist. For medical reasons. He needs to lean against the wall. Sienna raised an eyebrow. Medical reasons? Then he should have booked it, or pre-boarded. Look, Janice snapped, her patience evaporating. We have a fully booked flight. Mr. Sterling is a priority partner. I can move you to 1C. It's right there. It's the same seat, same service. You're making a scene for no reason. I'm not moving, Sienna said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. I paid full fare for this seat. Specifically, I have documents to review that are confidential, and I need the window privacy. 1C exposes my screen to the aisle. Confidential documents? Priscilla laughed, a dry, cracking sound. What, your homework? Or are you writing a blog? Carter sneered. I'll tell you what, I'm a generous man. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and threw them onto Sienna's lap. $500, Carter said. For your trouble. Take the aisle seat. Buy yourself some new clothes when we land. The cabin went deadly silent. The bills sat on Sienna's grey leggings like an insult. Sienna picked up the bills slowly. Carter smirked, thinking he had won. You think this is about money? Sienna asked. Everything is about money, Carter said, and clearly you need it more than I do. Sienna stood up. She was taller than she looked while seated. She towered slightly over Priscilla. She took the $500, ripped the bills in half with a single, violent motion, and dropped the confetti-like pieces into Carter's open hand. I don't want your money, Sienna whispered. I want my seat, and I want you to get out of my face. Carter's face went purple. He slapped the pieces of paper away. "That is federal currency, you crazy—" "Janice," Carter shouted. "She's aggressive. Did you see that? She threatened me. I don't feel safe flying with her." This was the trigger phrase. In the post-9/11 world, "I don't feel safe" was the magic spell that summoned the authorities. Janice nodded, her decision made. "Mom, you need to grab your bags." "Excuse me?" Sienna asked. "You are disrupting the flight. You have been aggressive toward another passenger. I am removing you from this aircraft." Sienna looked around the cabin. "Is anyone else seeing this? He threw money at me. He is harassing me." A man in seat 2A looked down at his shoes. A woman in 2B sipped her champagne, looking out the window. No one spoke. They were part of the club. Sienna was the intruder. "I am not leaving," Sienna said. "I have a meeting in London that cannot be rescheduled. I am the owner of—" She stopped herself. She didn't want to play that card yet. It sounded desperate, if not proven. "I am a paying customer." "I'm getting the captain," Janice said, storming toward the cockpit. Carter leaned down, whispering into Sienna's ear. "You picked the wrong flight, sweetheart. I know the CEO of this airline. I'm having dinner with him next week. By the time you get off this plane, you'll be on the no-fly list." Sienna looked at him, her eyes cold. She pulled out her phone again. She didn't open Instagram or Twitter. She opened a secure messaging app. She typed a single line to a contact saved as admin. Whitfield.FAA. The message read, "Need immediate clearance check on tail number N4992AA. Interference with owner. Ground stop. Now." She hit send. Then she looked at Carter. "You're having dinner with the CEO? That's nice. I'm afraid you're going to be late." The cockpit door opened and Captain Holloway emerged. He was a thick-set man with silver hair and the weary authority of a man who just wanted to get in the air and engage autopilot. Janice was whispering furiously in his ear, pointing at Sienna, then at Carter, pantomiming the tearing of the money. Holloway adjusted his hat and walked to row 1. He didn't look at Sienna. He looked at Carter. "Mr. Sterling," Holloway said, extending a hand. "Apologies for the delay. We appreciate your patience." "Captain," Carter said, smoothing his jacket. "This woman is unstable. She destroyed my property and threatened my wife. I refuse to fly with her in the cabin." Holloway turned to Sienna. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't ask for witnesses. He saw a disruptive element delaying his pushback time. "Miss," Holloway said, his voice booming, "you are in violation of FAA regulations regarding compliance with crew member instructions. You have 2 choices. You walk off this plane now on your own, or I call Port Authority police and they drag you off in handcuffs. If that happens, you will be charged with federal interference." Sienna remained seated. Her heart was pounding, but her face was stone. She checked her phone. 3 dots were bouncing on the reply from Whitfield. "Captain Holloway," Sienna said, reading his name tag. "I strongly suggest you check the ownership manifest of this specific aircraft before you make a decision you cannot undo." Holloway scoffed. "The ownership? Aero Atlantic owns this plane, and I am the captain. I have the final say on who flies. Now get up." "Aero Atlantic leases this plane," Sienna corrected him, "from Vance Aerospace Leasing. Specifically, this is a 777-300ER, tail number November 492 Alpha Alpha. I suggest you call your dispatch." "I don't have time for your delusions," Holloway snapped. He grabbed his radio. "Tower, this is Flight 492. We have a passenger refusal to deplane at the gate, requesting LEOs, law enforcement officers, to board immediately." "Copy 492, the radio crackled. "Police are dispatched. ETA 2 minutes. Carter Sterling laughed. "There you go. The hard way. I hope you like jail food." Priscilla opened her purse and took out her phone. "I'm going to record this," she said, with a malicious grin. "This is going to be viral. Ghetto girl fights captain." Sienna looked at the camera lens, pointing at her face. "Make sure you get the tail number in the shot, Priscilla. It's on the safety card." 2 minutes later, 3 Port Authority police officers boarded the plane. They were large, imposing, and clearly tired of dealing with unruly passengers. "Where is she?" the lead officer asked. "Right there," Janice pointed, her finger trembling with self-righteous adrenaline. "1A, she assaulted a passenger and refuses to leave." The officer stepped up to Sienna. "Ma'am, up. Now. Don't make us touch you." Sienna raised her hands, palms open. "I am complying, but I am stating for the record that I am the legal owner of this asset, and you are removing me from my own property under false pretenses initiated by a biased crew. Tell it to the judge," the officer said. He grabbed her arm, hard. Sienna winced but stood up. She grabbed her bag. As she was shoved into the aisle, she looked back at Carter Sterling. He was already settling into seat 1A, stretching his legs out with a groan of satisfaction. "Comfy?" Sienna asked. "Delicious," Carter replied. The officers marched Sienna down the aisle. The walk of shame. Hundreds of eyes in economy watched her go. Some were filming, some were shaking their heads. She was humiliated. She was dragged off the plane like a criminal, led onto the jet bridge, and pushed against the wall. "ID and boarding pass," the officer demanded. Sienna handed them over. "You might want to wait before you book me," she said softly. "Look out the window." The officer frowned. "Why?" "Because," Sienna said, pointing to the tarmac below. Through the glass of the terminal, flashing lights were visible. Not police lights. These were different. Several black SUVs with government plates were screeching onto the tarmac, surrounding the plane. They weren't blocking the terminal. They were blocking the wheels of the Boeing 737. And then Sienna's phone buzzed. She looked down. Admin. Whitfield. Asset frozen. Executive order. 82B initiated. No one moves. I'm on the line with the tower. Put the officer on the phone. Sienna looked at the Port Authority officer, who was staring out the window at the swarm of federal vehicles surrounding the plane. "Officer," Sienna said, her voice cutting through his confusion. "That is the FAA and the Department of Transportation. They aren't here for me. They're here because you just hijacked my plane." She held out the phone. "It's for you. It's the FAA administrator." The officer looked at the phone, then at Sienna, then at the plane. The color drained from his face. On the plane, the engines, which had just started to whine, suddenly cut out. The power dipped. Captain Holloway's voice came over the intercom, but he sounded shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been ordered to cut engines by the tower. We have a security situation on the tarmac. Please remain seated." Carter Sterling, in seat 1A, looked out the window. He saw men in windbreakers with "Federal Agent" printed on the back, running toward the stairs. "What the hell is she doing?" Carter muttered. He had no idea. The Karma train hadn't just arrived. It was about to derail his entire life. The silence on the jet bridge was profound, broken only by the distant whine of baggage carts on the tarmac below, and the heavy breathing of Officer Davis, the Port Authority policeman, who was currently holding a phone that felt like a live grenade. Sienna Vance stood against the corrugated metal wall of the bridge, rubbing the spot on her bicep where Davis had grabbed her. Her expression hadn't changed. It was the mask she wore during hostile takeovers and congressional hearings, a look of absolute, unwavering certainty. Officer Davis, a man who had spent 15 years breaking up drunken brawls at baggage claim and escorting late passengers, stared at the smartphone. The name on the caller ID, admin. Whitfield.FAA meant nothing to him personally, but the authoritative, clipped tones coming from the speaker meant everything. He slowly raised the phone to his ear. "This is Officer Davis, Port Authority Aviation Security Unit. Who am I speaking with?" Sienna watched him. She didn't smirk, she didn't pace, she just waited. Davis's eyes widened. His posture, previously aggressive and dominating, collapsed. His shoulders slumped. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Administrator? Yes, I didn't know. Nobody told us." He listened for another 30 seconds, his face paling under the fluorescent lights. He looked up at Sienna, not as a suspect, but as if she were a ghost that had just materialized to haunt him. "Yes, sir. I will. Immediately." Davis lowered the phone slowly. He didn't hand it back to Sienna. He held it out like an offering. Ms. Vance," he stammered. The bluster was gone, replaced by the terrified realization that he had just put his hands on the wrong person. "Administrator Whitfield needs me to confirm that you are unharmed and that you are currently in possession of your belongings." Sienna took the phone. "I am unharmed physically," she said, her voice loud enough for the second officer to hear. "However, I have been publicly humiliated, falsely accused of assault, and removed from an aircraft that my company legally owns under a dry lease agreement with Aero Atlantic. An agreement that Flight 492 just violated by denying transport to a principal officer of the lesser." Davis gulped. "Ma'am, the flight crew," the captain insisted. "We were just following the protocol for a disruptive passenger." "The protocol," Sienna said coldly, "assumes the flight crew isn't lying to you to cover up their own bias and incompetence. You didn't ask a single question, officer. You just grabbed." Inside the cockpit of Flight 492, the atmosphere was rapidly shifting from annoyance to panic. Captain Holloway was staring out of his side window. The view, usually clear tarmac ready for pushback, was blocked by 3 large black Chevrolet Suburbans with tinted windows and blue lights flashing silently in the grille. Men in dark windbreakers were standing around the nose gear of the Boeing 777. The radio crackled, but it wasn't the usual rhythmic cadence of ground control. It was urgent. "Aero Atlantic 492 Tower, hold your position. Do not, I repeat, do not initiate pushback. You are under a mandatory ground stop order issued by the FAA Regional Office." Holloway grabbed the mic, his brow furrowing. "Tower 492. We just cleared a disruptive passenger. We are ready to go. What's the nature of the hold? We're burning schedule here." There was a pause on the radio. When the controller came back, their voice was strained. 492. This didn't come from us. This came from Washington. You have federal agents on the ground securing the aircraft. They are demanding immediate boarding access. Do not seal the cabin door. If you move this aircraft 1 inch, you will be in violation of a direct federal order." Holloway looked at his first officer, a younger man named Thompson, whose eyes were wide with alarm. "What did that girl do?" Thompson whispered. "Did she call in a bomb threat?" "She didn't look like a terrorist," Holloway muttered, dread pooling in his stomach. "She looked like a tired kid in a hoodie." He remembered her words. "I strongly suggest you check the ownership manifest." He felt a cold spike of adrenaline. He hadn't checked. He had assumed. Back in the cabin, the mood in first class was still one of self-satisfied victory. Carter Sterling had settled into seat 1A. He stretched his legs out, enjoying the extra bulkhead space. He accepted a pre-departure mimosa from a visibly relieved Janice. "Terrible business," Carter said, taking a sip. "Some people just don't know how to behave in civilized society." "I couldn't agree more, Mr. Sterling," Janice said, offering him a hot towel. "I apologize you had to deal with that. We rarely get that element up here in first." Priscilla Sterling was scrolling through the video she had recorded on her phone. "Oh, this is gold, Carter. Look at her face when the police grabbed her." She looked so entitled, like she couldn't believe it was happening to her. "She'll learn," Carter chuckled. "The world has a way of correcting people who overstep." He looked out the window, expecting to see the terminal moving away as the plane pushed back. Instead, he saw the flashing blue lights reflected on the wet tarmac. "What's the hold-up?" Carter grumbled, checking his gold Rolex. "We should be moving." He peered down. "Janice, why are there police cars blocking the plane?" Janice hurried over, looking out the window over his shoulder. "I'm not sure, sir. Maybe they're escorting her away. Or maybe we have a VIP boarding late." "Well, tell them to hurry up," Carter snapped. "I have a dinner reservation in London." The air conditioning system, running on the auxiliary power unit, hummed louder as the minutes ticked by. The cabin temperature began to rise slightly. The tension, previously focused on Sienna, now shifted to the unexplained delay. In the jet bridge, the dynamic had completely inverted. Officer Davis was now essentially standing guard for Sienna, waiting for instructions. Sienna finished her call with Whitfield. She put her phone in her pocket and looked at the officers. "Administrator Whitfield is arriving in 10 minutes. He was already at the airport for a conference," Sienna said calmly. "In the meantime, Agent Sarah Jenkins from the local FAA field office is entering the jet bridge now. You will take your orders from her." The door from the terminal opened. It wasn't another tired airline employee. It was a woman in her 40s, wearing a sharp navy suit and a windbreaker with the Department of Transportation seal on it. She moved with a purpose that made the Port Authority officers instinctively step aside. Agent Jenkins didn't look at the police. She walked straight to Sienna and extended a hand. "Ms. Vance, Agent Jenkins, FAA Field Operations. Administrator Whitfield briefed me. Are you all right?" "I'm furious, Agent Jenkins," Sienna said, shaking her hand firmly. "My plane is being held hostage by a captain who refuses to read his own paperwork, and a passenger who thinks his wallet is a permission slip to abuse people." Jenkins nodded, her expression grim. "We're going to rectify that now. The administrator has authorized a full field investigation under Section 404. We are reboarding." Jenkins turned to Officer Davis. "Officer, you and your partner will escort Ms. Vance and myself back onto the aircraft. You are there to ensure our safety and to execute any federal warrants that may be issued in the next 20 minutes. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Davis said, his voice barely a whisper. "Good," Jenkins said. She turned toward the plane door. "Let's go meet Captain Holloway." Janice was in the forward galley, frantically trying to get a straight answer from the cockpit about the delay when she heard footsteps thundering down the jet bridge. She assumed it was the gate agent coming to finally close the door. She turned, a professional smile plastered on her face, ready to apologize for the delay. The smile died instantly. Standing in the doorway was not the gate agent. It was Sienna Vance. The girl in the hoodie was back, but her posture had changed. She no longer looked like a tired passenger. She looked like someone arriving to inspect a derelict property. Flanking her were the two Port Authority officers who had dragged her off minutes earlier, looking sheepish and terrified. And leading the group was a woman Janice had never seen, Agent Jenkins, whose eyes scanned the galley with the cold precision of a federal auditor. "You!" Janice shrieked, her composure finally snapping. "What are you doing back here? You were removed. You are trespassing. Officer, why is she—" Agent Jenkins stepped forward, fluidly producing a leather wallet with a gold badge and ID card. She held it inches from Janice's face. Federal Aviation Administration, Jenkins announced, her voice cutting through the galley like a knife. This aircraft is now under federal investigation. Step aside, flight attendant. Immediately. Janice froze. The badge looked very real. The look in Jenkins's eyes was terrifyingly real. But, Mr. Sterling, Janice stammered, pointing toward the cabin. I don't care about Mr. Sterling, Jenkins snapped. Where is the captain? In the cockpit, Janice whispered, shrinking against the galley carts. Jenkins turned to Sienna. Miss Vance, if you would please accompany me. Officers, secure this galley. No one enters or leaves this aircraft without my explicit permission. That includes the flight crew. Sienna nodded and followed Jenkins toward the cockpit door. The door was slightly ajar. Jenkins didn't knock. She pushed it open. Captain Halloway and First Officer Thompson were arguing in hushed tones about the vehicles blocking their wheels. They both jumped when the door banged open. Captain Halloway, Jenkins said, stepping into the cramped space, filling it with authority. Agent Jenkins, FAA, we need to have a conversation. Halloway spun around in his seat. His face went red when he saw Sienna standing behind the agent. How did she get back on my plane? Halloway demanded, his voice booming. I ordered her removed. This is a severe violation of security protocols. I want her off, and I want you to identify yourself properly. I just did, Captain, Jenkins said, her voice eerily calm compared to his bluster. She held up the badge again. And this is no longer your plane for the duration of this incident. You have been grounded. Grounded? On what grounds? Halloway sputtered. Because I removed a disruptive economy passenger trying to poach first class? Sienna stepped forward into the cockpit doorway. The soft lighting of the instrument panel highlighted her face, no longer obscured by headphones. Captain, Sienna said, I wasn't poaching. I was sitting in the seat I purchased on the plane that my company, Vance Aerospace Leasing, provided to your airline. You violated the terms of your dry lease agreement, specifically Article 14 regarding owner access. But more importantly, you allowed a passenger to dictate safety protocols based on his bank account. Halloway stared at her. The pieces started to click together. The confidence, the specific knowledge of the tail number, the mention of the ownership. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Vance Aerospace? Thompson, the first officer, whispered. Like the defense contractor? The very same, Sienna confirmed. And right now, you are holding up a principal officer with DOD clearance. Administrator Whitfield is not happy, Captain. Halloway looked at Jenkins, silent, pleading in his eyes. Jenkins didn't blink. Captain, I need your pilot's certificate, your medical, the aircraft maintenance logbook, and the flight manifest. Now, First Officer, you are relieved of duty at the controls. Step out of the cockpit. While the cockpit was being locked down, the commotion had naturally filtered back into the first-class cabin. The sight of the hoodie girl walking back onto the plane with federal agents had caused a ripple of murmurs. Carter Sterling, still sipping his mimosa in seat 1A, heard the voices. He stood up, his face twisting with indignation. What is going on here? Carter demanded, stepping into the aisle and blocking the path of Sienna and Agent Jenkins as they emerged from the cockpit area. Carter pointed a finger directly at Sienna. You! I saw the police take you away. How dare you come back on this plane? You are disturbing the peace, and I will personally sue you into oblivion if you don't turn around right now. Sienna didn't even look at him. She just looked at Agent Jenkins. Agent, this is the individual in question, Mr. Carter Sterling. Jenkins stepped in front of Sienna, facing Carter. Carter was a tall man, used to towering over people, but Jenkins didn't back down an inch. "Mr. Sterling," Jenkins said, "I am a federal agent. Lower your voice and take your seat." Carter bristled. "I will do no such thing. I am a Diamond Elite member. I know the CEO. This woman is a trespasser." Priscilla chimed in from seat 1B, phone still recording. "I have it on video. She assaulted us. Why aren't you arresting her?" Jenkins turned her cold gaze to Priscilla. "Ma'am, put that phone away, or I will confiscate it as evidence in a federal investigation. Do it now." Priscilla's hand faltered. The word federal had a sobering effect. She lowered the phone. Jenkins turned back to Carter. "Mr. Sterling, you are currently interfering with a federal agent in the performance of her duties. That is a felony. Now, I need to see your boarding pass and your government-issued ID." Carter scoffed incredulously. "My boarding pass? You want to see my boarding pass? I am Carter Sterling. I am in seat 1A. "Show me the pass," Jenkins commanded. With a huff of supreme annoyance, Carter dug into his blazer pocket and produced his phone. He pulled up the airline app and shoved the screen toward Jenkins. Jenkins looked at it. She didn't smile. She just nodded slowly. "This boarding pass says 1C, Jenkins read aloud, her voice carrying through the silent cabin. "The aisle seat." "It's a technicality," Carter yelled, his face turning the color of a ripe tomato. "I always sit by the window. The flight attendant moved that girl because she was in my seat." "No, Mr. Sterling," Jenkins said, her voice dropping to a dangerous monotone. "She was in her seat. You are currently occupying seat 1A without a valid ticket for that position. You used intimidation and financial bribery to coerce the flight crew into removing a legal passenger so you could take a seat that wasn't yours." Jenkins stepped closer, invading his personal space just as he had done to Sienna. Under FAA regulations, that constitutes interference with flight crew members and acts of intimidation aboard an aircraft. You are no longer flying today, Mr. Sterling. Carter looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The other passengers in first class were staring, mouths agape. The narrative had flipped so fast they were getting whiplash. You can't remove me," Carter whispered, his voice trembling with rage and sudden fear. "I am a Diamond member." Sienna stepped forward from behind Agent Jenkins. She looked at Carter, then down at Priscilla, then up at the overhead bin where her canvas bag still sat next to Carter's Louis Vuitton duffel. "Diamonds are just pressurized carbon, Carter," Sienna said softly. "They crack if you hit them hard enough." Agent Jenkins motioned to the Port Authority officers waiting in the galley. "Officers, please escort Mr. Sterling off the aircraft. He is being detained for questioning regarding violations of Title 49 of the United States Code." Carter clung to the armrest of seat 1A. "No, Priscilla, call the lawyer. Call the CEO. Tell them we are being hijacked." "You aren't being hijacked, sir," Sienna said, as the officers grabbed Carter's arms, much less gently than they had grabbed hers. "You're just being deplaned. It's a bitch, isn't it?" The removal of Carter Sterling was not a dignified affair. It was a cacophony of protests, legal threats, and the squeaking of expensive loafers dragging against the industrial carpet of the aisle. "Do you know who I am?" Carter bellowed, his face a mottled map of rage as Officer Davis and his partner frog-marched him past the stunned economy passengers. "I am a personal friend of Senator Harkin. This is kidnapping. Priscilla, get their badge numbers. Get everything." Priscilla Sterling, however, was not getting badge numbers. She was scrambling to collect her belongings from row 1, stuffing her Rimowa bag with shaky hands. "Ma'am," Agent Jenkins said, standing over her, "you are free to remain on the flight if you can conduct yourself according to federal regulations. However, your husband is being detained." Priscilla looked at Carter, who was currently shouting about a lawsuit at the top of his lungs near the galley. Then she looked at the empty seat in 1A, the window seat, and then at Sienna, who was calmly leaning against the bulkhead, watching the show. Priscilla hesitated. I can't stay. I can't fly with her. She pointed a manicured finger at Sienna. Then you deplane, Jenkins said efficiently. Grab your bag. Move. Priscilla hurried after her husband, the clicks of her heels sounding like a retreat. The cabin was left in a stunned, heavy silence. The show was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Just as the Sterlings were shoved onto the jet bridge, the heavy thud of footsteps announced a new arrival. The air in the cabin seemed to change pressure. Administrator Whitfield walked onto the plane. He was a man in his late 50s, African-American, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Captain Holloway's car. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. He carried a leather folio tucked under his arm. He didn't stop at the galley. He walked straight past the flight attendants, past the gaping passengers in first class, and nodded respectfully to Sienna. Miss Vance, Whitfield said, his voice a deep baritone that commanded immediate attention. My apologies for the delay. The Secretary of Transportation sends his regards. Thank you, Administrator, Sienna replied. I assume you're here for the inspection? I'm here for the clean-up, Whitfield corrected. He turned to the cockpit, where Captain Holloway was standing, looking like a man who had just realized he'd driven off a cliff. Captain Holloway, Whitfield asked. Yes. Yes, sir, Holloway stammered. I am Administrator Marcus Whitfield, FAA. This is my card. He handed Holloway a card. And this, he handed Holloway a thick envelope, is a notice of proposed certificate action. Holloway's hands shook as he took the envelope. Certificate action. Sir, I was just maintaining order. Whitfield stepped into the cockpit, forcing Holloway back against the instrument panel. You grounded a flight, Whitfield began, his voice low but audible to the front rows, because a passenger with a confirmed ticket, who happens to be the lesser of this aircraft, refused to be bullied by a man with a shiny credit card. You failed to verify the manifest. You failed to de-escalate. You utilized law enforcement as a tool for customer service rather than security. And according to Agent Jenkins, you failed to recognize the ownership documents presented to you. I didn't know she owned the plane, Holloway protested. She was wearing a hoodie. She looked like a standby. Since when does a hoodie invalidate a boarding pass, Captain? Whitfield asked sharply. Do you check the tax returns of every passenger before you decide if they are worthy of the seat they paid for? Holloway fell silent. Here is the reality, Whitfield continued, pacing the small space of the galley now. Miss Vance's company, Vance Propulsion Systems, holds the maintenance contracts for the engines on this bird. By dragging her off, you didn't just insult a passenger. You removed the technical authority required for this aircraft to be certified airworthy for this specific transatlantic crossing under the current lease terms. Whitfield turned to the first officer, Thompson. Thompson, is it? Yes, sir, the young pilot squeaked. You are now the pilot in command, Whitfield stated. Captain Holloway is relieved of duty pending a drug and alcohol screening and a competency review board. He will not be flying this leg, or likely any leg for the foreseeable future. Me? Thompson asked, eyes wide. Sir, I've never flown the Atlantic from the left seat as PIC. Then you better get the relief captain up here from the bunk or call crew scheduling, Whitfield said, because Holloway is leaving with me. Whitfield turned to Janice. The flight attendant was pressing herself into the corner of the galley, trying to become invisible. And you, Whitfield said. Janice flinched. I was just doing what Mr. Sterling asked. He is a Diamond member. Miss Vance is a human being, Whitfield said. And she is also the reason you have a job. This airline leases its fleet. If she pulls the lease, this airline loses 20% of its capacity overnight. Do you understand the economics of the company you work for, or just the color of the credit cards? Janice started to cry. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Bias doesn't require intent to be destructive, Whitfield said. It just requires ignorance. You are suspended pending an investigation into violation of DOT discrimination statutes. Grab your bag. Sienna watched them go. Holloway, stripped of his epaulets in spirit if not reality, walked off the plane with his head down. Janice followed, sobbing into a tissue. The Sterlings were gone. The cabin was empty of the antagonists. Sienna looked at Whitfield. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me, Sienna, Whitfield said, his face softening. You could have bought the airline and fired them all. You showed restraint. I just wanted to sleep, Sienna sighed. I have a meeting with the Ministry of Defence in London at 9 a.m. Well, Whitfield checked his watch. We've cleared the airspace for you. You have a new slot. Get some sleep. Whitfield turned and walked off the jet bridge. Agent Jenkins gave Sienna a final nod and followed. The door to the plane remained open. The first officer, Thompson, was on the radio, frantically calling for a reserve captain. Sienna walked back to row 1. The cabin was deadly silent. Every passenger in first class was looking at her. They looked at her hoodie. They looked at her sneakers. But this time they didn't see a trespasser. They saw power. She picked up her canvas bag from the overhead bin where it had remained untouched. She sat down in seat 1A, the window seat. The man in 2A, who had looked at his shoes earlier, cleared his throat. He stammered. I'm sorry about what happened. That guy was a jerk. Sienna adjusted her noise-cancelling headphones. She didn't smile. She didn't absolve him of his silence. He was, Sienna said. Enjoy your flight. She put the headphones on. The world went silent. The heavy door of the Boeing 777 closed with a finality that echoed through the first-class cabin. The seal was airtight, locking out the noise of the terminal, the flashing lights of the police cruisers, and the chaos of the last hour. But inside the tube, the atmosphere was heavier than the pressurized air of the cabin. For the remaining passengers in row 1 and row 2, the dynamic of the world had shifted on its axis. The man in 2A, a hedge fund manager who prided himself on reading markets, realized he had misread the most important room of his life. He stared at the back of seat 1A, the seat occupied by the girl in the grey hoodie, with a mixture of reverence and terror. The new flight crew, led by Captain Morris, a reserve pilot who had been pulled from his dinner in the crew lounge, treated the aircraft like it was made of nitroglycerin. Morris knew exactly whose engines were powering his ascent. He knew that the woman in 1A wasn't just a passenger. She was the landlord. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the engines, Vance Propulsion VP-90s, spooled up with a deep, resonant roar. To everyone else, it was noise. To Sienna Vance, it was the sound of her own design, a lullaby of compressed air and combustion that she had spent 5 years perfecting in a wind tunnel in Nevada. 10 minutes after reaching cruising altitude, the fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. David, the young flight attendant who had replaced Janice, approached 1A as if approaching an altar. He didn't offer the standard menu. Miss Vance, he whispered, bending low so as not to disturb her solitude. Captain Morris wanted me to inform you that he has adjusted our flight path to a more northern track to catch a stronger tailwind. He hopes to make up the delay time for you. Can I get you anything? Champagne? A blanket? The entire bottle? Sienna looked up from her tablet. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, but from the sheer exhaustion of having to defend her dignity. Water, David. Just sparkling water. And please tell the crew to relax. I'm not going to eat them, unless they try to move me again. David let out a nervous, breathless laugh. I don't think anyone is moving you ever again, Mom. Sienna sipped her water and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. The world below was asleep, but the internet never slept. What she found on her screen confirmed that the karma she had initiated wasn't just a ripple. It was a tsunami. The incident had gone global before the plane even left New York airspace. A teenager in economy, sitting in row 4, had filmed the entire altercation through the gap in the partition curtain. The video was shaking, but the audio was crystal clear. It captured Carter Sterling's sneering voice. $500. Buy yourself some new clothes. It captured the sound of the bills ripping. It captured the police dragging Sienna down the aisle. But the internet detectives had done the rest. The hashtag #LarchonCourseat1A was trending #1 worldwide on X, formerly Twitter. Sienna clicked on a breaking news link from a major financial network. The headline screamed, Aero Atlantic stock plunges 6% as billionaire defense contractor dragged from own plane. The article detailed the chaos. It wasn't just bad PR. It was a financial bloodbath for the airline. Analysts were downgrading the stock, citing severe risk to leasing agreements. But the real destruction was reserved for Carter Sterling. Sienna scrolled to a gossip site that moved faster than the New York Times. The headline read, Sterling Equities CEO arrested, the fall of a Wall Street giant. The article included a photo of Carter being shoved into the back of a police cruiser, his blazer rumpled, his face a mask of shock. The article noted that the board of directors of his own firm had convened an emergency midnight session via Zoom. The verdict was swift. They couldn't have a CEO facing federal charges for interfering with a flight crew, a felony that carried up to 20 years in prison. Carter Sterling had been fired for cause before he was even processed at the precinct. Sienna closed the laptop. She leaned her head against the cool plastic of the window shade. She watched the stars above the Atlantic. She didn't feel glee. She felt a profound sense of correction. The universe had balanced the equation. 6 hours later, the lights of London sprawled out beneath the wings. The landing was feather-light, Captain Morris putting the 300-ton bird on the ground with the grace of a ballerina. They didn't taxi to a normal gate at Terminal 5. The aircraft was directed to a remote hard stand, usually reserved for heads of state or high-risk diplomats. As the engines whined down, a staircase was rolled up to the forward door. Sienna grabbed her battered canvas bag, the same bag Priscilla Sterling had sneered at, and stood up. The cabin was silent. As she walked toward the door, the man in 2A stood up. Miss Vance, he said, his voice steady this time. Respect. Sienna nodded once, acknowledging the truce, and exited into the cool, grey London morning. At the bottom of the stairs, a convoy of black Range Rovers waited. Her London liaison, Arthur, a man of impeccable British tailoring and dry wit, was holding the door of the lead vehicle open. Good morning, Sienna, Arthur said, taking her bag. I trust the service improved on the second attempt? It was adequate, Sienna said, sliding into the leather interior of the car. What's the damage report? Arthur climbed in beside her as the convoy began to move, flanked by police outriders, a perk of her meeting with the Ministry of Defense. Complete annihilation, Arthur said cheerfully. I've been on the phone with New York all morning. Carter Sterling is currently in a holding cell in Queens. His bail is set at $2 million, which his wife is struggling to access because their joint assets have been frozen pending the federal investigation. It seems the FAA doesn't take kindly to people hijacking their command chain. And the wife? Sienna asked, watching the tarmac blur by. Priscilla? Arthur chuckled. Aero Atlantic is suing her. Apparently, filming inside a secure area during a federal law enforcement operation violates about 12 different statutes. She's facing a civil suit for damages caused by the delay. They are blaming the entire incident on the Sterlings to save their own skin. And the airline? They are terrified you're going to pull the lease on the 777 fleet, Arthur said. The CEO of Aero Atlantic is flying to London tonight. He wants to meet you for dinner. He says he wants to apologize personally. Sienna looked out the window as they merged onto the M4 highway toward central London. Tell him I'm busy, Sienna said. Tell him I'm having dinner with someone who actually appreciates the value of a seat. Myself. Room service. The car pulled up to the curb of the Ministry of Defence building in Westminster. The press was there. Not the financial press, but the tabloids, alerted by the viral nature of the story. They swarmed the car as Sienna stepped out. Flashes popped like strobes. Microphones were thrust in her face. Ms. Vance, is it true you bought the airline? Sienna, what do you have to say to Carter Sterling? Ms. Vance, why were you wearing a hoodie in first class? Sienna paused on the steps. She looked at the crowd. She pulled her grey hood up over her head, framing her face. I wore a hoodie, Sienna said, her voice cutting through the clamour, because I paid for comfort, not a fashion show. And as for Mr. Sterling? She looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. He forgot the golden rule of aviation. Gravity doesn't care how rich you are. What goes up must come down. And sometimes it comes down in handcuffs. She turned and walked through the heavy oak doors of the ministry, leaving the noise, the flashes, and the regret of her enemies behind her. She had a meeting to attend. And this time, she was sitting at the head of the table. This story is a brutal reminder that status is an illusion, and character is the only currency that matters. Carter Sterling and the crew of Flight 492 judged a book by its cover, failing to realize that Sienna Vance wasn't just a chapter in their journey. She was the author of the whole book. They mistook humility for poverty and silence for weakness, and they paid the ultimate price for their arrogance. In a world where everyone is trying to be a diamond member, be a Sienna Vance, powerful enough to crush your enemies, but humble enough to just ask for the seat you paid for. If you enjoyed watching the arrogance of the elite get absolutely crushed by the quiet power of the truth, make sure you smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more justice seekers like you. Have you ever been judged by your appearance while traveling? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories where the underdog turns out to be the overlord, hit subscribe and ring that bell. You don't want to miss the next flight. Thanks for watching. And remember, be kind or be humble, because you never know who you're sitting next to.